And with this, let's get started with Cookie. Round of applause, come on. Can we close that door? We may.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody coming out in the snowstorm and showing up here. And thanks to Daniel for inviting me to make this presentation. My presentation is basically on thermaling. I call it gliding to soaring. These two words often mean the same thing, gliding and soaring. But in my context, gliding is what you do a lot of as a student, kind of downward flying. Soaring is the real thing, where we actually make the glider go up, stay up, and it leads to being able to do bigger and better things. But the other presenters are going to get into that. But thermaling is really what the sport is all about. I mean, I think every aspect of the sport somehow comes back to thermaling. So the better you are at thermaling, the more you can do with the sport. Before I go to the next slide, I just want to say something here. A lot of people that know me say, Cookie, you look at things black and white all the time, plus or minus. The people over there. I never look at the gray area. But that being said, thermaling, you're either going up or you're not. This sounds quite simple, but keep in mind, if you're not in a thermal in a glider, you're going to be on the ground in a matter of minutes, typically. So we got to concentrate on going up. So again, this is geared more towards beginners. When we talk about primary instruction, instructors have a pretty big job here. They concentrate on gliding, teaching the techniques towards the PTS, the practical test, basic safety kind of things. Instructors can't always spend a lot of time teaching thermaling. Most of us try to, but if we taught thermaling, it would take you 5-10 years to get a glider license. So the airmanship standards for private pilot are actually quite minimal when it comes to soaring. So when you get that license, that's your starting point. You're going to kind of learn soaring. And unfortunately, newly minted pilots are often left on their own to develop their thermaling skills. A lot of us back in the day, we didn't have seminars like this. We kind of figured it out by trial and error. And it's a bit of a longer trip that way as opposed to seminars like this. So I want to talk about some goals in thermaling. One thing to improve your flying skills is to have realistic goals and sort of a step-by-step process. And the badge program is a great vehicle for that. And starting with the C badge, it's just a 1-hour thermal. Well, for a lot of guys in this room, that's nothing. You know, you could do that with your eyes closed. For beginners, I remember when I started out, if I got an 18-minute flight instead of a 15-minute flight, I thought I was doing good. So a goal of a 1-hour thermal for a newly minted pilot or even a student pilot, that's a great goal. Of course, it moves up. The bronze badge is 2 2-hour flights. Silver and gold duration. By the way, the 5-hour flight is a gold duration as well. And then climbing altitude too. We have silver climb and gold climb might not even be done in thermals. And this leads to the cross-country flying for the more advanced badges. So I think all beginners should really work on these goals. So I want to talk a little bit about airmanship again. If we go back to the practical standards, I think I got the standards right here. You can pass your practical test keeping your speed plus or minus 10 knots, bank angle plus or minus 10 degrees, your heading plus or minus 10 degrees. When we want to get good at thermaling, you notice I put question marks here. Can anybody come up with what these standards should be for thermaling? Anybody? Plus or minus 2, he says?
3, 5, and it doesn't matter.
What's that?
Constantly changing.
3 knots on speed is a good target. Bank within 5, and heading, if you're maintaining a bank angle, the heading takes care of itself.
Okay, all good answers. I'm going to give a little different answer. The speed should be what it should be. If it changes, put it back to where it should be. The bank angle has to be what it's supposed to be. The heading, again, in thermaling, I don't know if that comes into play quite so much. But these standards, if you're only at these standards, you're going to have trouble thermaling. So you have to work on this to prepare for that. Okay, what do thermals look like? Well, there's all kinds of books, all these cool pictures. You know, they show the plowed field and the clouds and all of this. And I'm sure you've all seen this. And they might look like that. Here's another stylized rendition. Boy, if they really look like this, wouldn't it be easy, right? They're all perfect. You just go up there. The next one I really like. This is like some kind of futuristic roller coaster. You know, they're all perfect. They all go up nice. We just ride this up, ride it down, and you know, how hard could that be? That's what I think thermals look like. And the reason I say this, they're not even. They're not continuous. There's places of lift and not lift and everything. This green stuff is this sink, by the way. Now, the reason I'm showing this stuff is to master thermaling, you have to get an image in your mind of what you think the thermal looks like or what it's doing. Sort of a model. It doesn't have to be realistic. As long as you have a model that kind of works. So those previous pictures are typical ones you see. This is one I kind of use a lot. I kind of visualize. This would be like a top view looking down at the thermal. That surrounding the thermal is typically either static air or sinking air. And thermal gets stronger as you go toward the center. It's not in increments like this. It would be continuous. So I call this the bullseye model. And we know that if we get in this thermal, maybe if we get closer to the center, we're going to find better lift. Again, the bullseye model probably looks a little more like that. Not really perfectly formed. Okay, is soaring a game of chance? Does anybody here think that soaring is a game of chance?
Absolutely.
He says absolutely.
If you read Daniel's
He
paper,
says
it sounds
absolutely.
like it is.
Now, again, I'm not talking exactly soaring, I'm talking thermaling. Most beginners play it like a game of chance. Most students, they take a tow, they fly around, they find a thermal, they're happy. If they don't, they land. I don't really think it's, in that sense, a game of chance. Yes, you might be luckier and find more thermals or less thermals. Totally unscientific. I say the odds of finding a thermal by random chance is 1 in 9. I came up with that. Most of the air is either going down or static, and only about 10% of the air is going up on a good thermal day. So if you just fly around by chance, you might find a thermal, but probably not. I think it's a game of skill. The more knowledge you have, the more experience, you can learn methods to change those odds from 1 in 9 to almost 100%. When I see the experienced pilots around here fly, if it's a thermal day, they find finding the thermal isn't really their problem. They're on to bigger and better things. So I think with a little skill and knowledge, we turn it into a game of skill, not so much a game of chance. Okay, what tools do we use for thermaling?
Sorry about that.
Okay, to me there's only a very few tools needed for thermaling. And the first one, we always hear, you fly by the seat of your pants. That we can feel thermals in our butt. What's interesting is when you fly into a thermal, you can feel it. But continuous lift, humans really can't feel. By the way, the FAA did not approve this slide, so you didn't see it. I did come up with a more realistic slide of a pilot feeling it in the butt. So that's one of our tools. What's another tool we use? Of course, our eyes. There's many, many visual references that can help us find thermals. Now, we can't see the thermals themselves typically, but we can see a lot of the effects or the results of thermals. Again, to be honest, the pilot's eyes, a little more like that. Okay, what's the other tool is our brain, right? Knowledge, understanding, experience, hand-eye coordination. So the brain really runs everything. So the more you know, the better you're going to thermal. This is the only real tool that's really like a tool not within ourselves, is the variometer. The variometer needs to be the audio type. A lot of beginners are flying gliders with not an audio variometer. You really have to have the audio so you can concentrate on other things and listen for the lift. It should be a compensated variometer. Does everybody know what a compensated variometer is? Good. It should be simple. I see guys that are kind of at the beginning stages of soaring, and they got the XL 5000 flight computer with the bells and whistles, and really the only thing that they need is the very simple variometer. Or if you've got a complicated thing, turn all the bells and whistles off. This may be too complicated. There's 4 controls on this. That's getting almost too complicated. I call this a club-style variometer. Arguably, this is a Borgelt B40, is the best variometer ever made. And we do have a world record holder which will attest to the wonders of this simple variometer. And world records are set with that simple variometer. You don't need all the crazy bells and whistles. Maybe later on in your career, yes, but now, no. Okay, where do we look for thermals? And how do we find them? This guy's looking, these guys are all looking. I don't know if he's looking in the right place there. Okay, the great philosopher, you can observe a lot just by watching. Kind of obvious. Guys that get good in soaring spend time observing things, watching things, looking, learning, listening. You want to watch, what do the pros do? How do they thermal? Watch them from the ground. Fly with them if you can. Figure out what they're doing. Figure out where are they finding the thermals. Watch the birds. Watch the weather. Watch the cloud formations. So if you just go through life paying attention, you'll get a lot more out of things. Okay, talking about finding thermals. For me, the #1 best place to find thermals, on toe. So many beginners, they're just concerned about the toe getting up in the air. They're missing the point that the toe pilot just brought you through 5 thermals on the way up to 3,000 feet. Consider the Aero toe to be a search pattern, okay? And a good toe pilot will help you search for thermals. He may know where they are because he's done a few toes already. He can also put you where the other gliders are. I find a rhythm on toe of thermals. In other words, I get airborne. Typically, we fly over this Dairy Queen field. Maybe I'm 300-400 feet, I feel a thermal. Then we climb to maybe 800 feet, I feel another thermal. Maybe 1,400 feet, I feel another. I'm thinking in my head, there's a pattern going here. Maybe the next one I feel, I'm going to release in the thermal. I don't recommend releasing very low for beginners. Some experts can get away with low releases. I don't know, maybe 1,500 feet would be the lowest you want to release. I like to be close to 2,000. But if I find a thermal at 1,800, 1,900 feet, that's way better to release in that. I see beginners, they say, well, I'm going to stay on tow to 4,000 feet because I have more chance of finding a thermal. But remember, it's not a game of chance, it's a game of skill. So if you can catch that first thermal right off a tow, you got it made. Your day is almost set for you. A couple of things, that first thermal is sometimes hard to catch because you're flying fast. So, and remember your variometer, which does work on tow, has a delay. So by the time you release and turn, you may have gone past that thermal. So it's a little tricky to hook into them on tow. Another thing, in terms of especially beginner thermaling, when you catch that first thermal off a tow, stay with it. Take it right to the top. Don't be in a hurry to go to another thermal or you see your buddies over there thermaling. That kind of sets the mood for the whole day. If you get a good first climb, you get up to the higher altitudes where things are easier. But again, a lot of missed opportunities when people don't catch that thermal. Yeah?
Along the lines of looking for thermals on tow, I wanted to reiterate your two-bump theory.
We're going to get to that.
But let's say we mentioned it in the context of tow too, because it works very nicely.
Well, we'll get back to
perfectly.
that then. Okay. The FAA kind of tells instructors we're not supposed to teach in the negative. In other words, we're supposed to tell you what to do, not what not to do. But I think if you know what not to do, the chances of doing the right thing are a lot better. So I'm going to talk a few times here about how not to find thermals. And something I see with my students all the time, I call it the pinball theory, how they miss thermals. And this kind of demonstrates that we have a sky full of thermals. This is like a top view. And the student will be just sort of flying along, wandering aimlessly. Well, they kind of fly into this thermal. What does it do? It lifts their wing, pushes them over. They fly over by that thermal, and it pushes them back. And just like a pinball game, you're going to stay right in the sink. So I see a lot of beginners just flying aimlessly. So don't fly aimlessly. Pinball theory. Another one of my peeves when I fly with beginners is they don't fly in a straight line. They just wander. If you learn to fly in straight lines, you've improved your chances of finding thermals. Now, this is really not a good way to find thermals, but it's better than the last way. If you fly in a straight line, eventually you're probably going to hit a thermal. If you knew where a thermal was, obviously fly a straight line to the thermal. Again, when I fly with beginners, we'll be flying along and I'll say, hey, do you see that cloud out there? Yeah. You think there's a thermal under the cloud? Yeah. Fly to the cloud. Here they go. Right? And when you're in the back seat, it just drives you nuts. It's like fly in a straight line. Also, you know my seeing everything black and white. You're either flying in a straight line or you're making a definite turn. Don't wander aimlessly. If you're going to turn to a new heading, turn to a new heading. But if you want to go from A to B, straight lines work better. Now, if you're flying in that straight line and you're hitting nothing but sink, nothing but sink, nothing but sink, guess what? Change course. All right. Again, you're improving your odds. You know, if you know there's thermals that you're not finding, well, you're in a sink street. Okay, thermals tend to line up with the wind. You've got the wind coming this way, right? So if we do happen to find a thermal, guess where we're going to find the next thermal? Directly upwind, right? How do we fly upwind? In a perfectly straight line. Again, my students tend not to be able to do that. So we definitely want to fly straight upwind. Now, a lot of times I'll ask a student, hey, we're going to look for another thermal, let's fly straight upwind. And I hear that pause. I'm like, do you know which way the wind is blowing? No. So be aware of which way the wind is blowing and be aware of this phenomenon that thermals tend to line up with the wind. Okay, let's talk about some visual clues. Remember, we use our eyes here. Visual clues for finding thermals. I divided this into in the air and on the ground. Not us on the ground, but things on the ground. Probably the #1 way to find thermals is clouds. The cumulus cloud is a dead giveaway. What do you think, Daniel? 80% of the time, that's the way we find them.
It'd be very nice if it was that way.
Yeah, okay.
Some days are more consistent.
Well, some days not. So clouds, cumulus clouds is probably our #1 clue. You could watch birds flying. They're pretty good at thermaling. Black vultures or whatever. Lesser things here. I've seen garbage flying in the air, leaves in corn stalks.
Balloons.
What?
Balloons? How do like little balloons?
They get caught in the thermals. The helium balloons for somehow get caught in thermals. Other gliders is a great way to find thermals. Let the other guy find it for you. And then we talk about haze domes. Maybe on a day when there's no clouds, you can see these little wispy, funny hazy things. Now on the ground, we figure the thermals are generated from the ground. I don't like to use these things too much because I like to fly up high. When you're up high, these don't often apply. High ground is a good one though, even when you're flying higher up. Generally thermals are better over high ground. We have a lot of ridges around here, and I'm not talking about ridge flying, but you might do better finding thermals over ridges. Note the wind direction. Again, wind blowing against a sunny hill can generate thermals. And we also know fields, towns, anything that generates thermals. The problem I have with these ground reference things is you're kind of already in trouble when you're resorting to this stuff. So I tend to try to fly as high as I can and use these clues and cues. Does anybody have any more? There's got to be a lot more. Any more visual?
The top third of the height band use the clouds and those sources, and the bottom third use the ground features.
Good, good. But that's what I say, when you're in the bottom third, you're starting to, you're getting in trouble, especially for beginners there. But by all means, use them if you have to. Okay, this is a technique I try to teach all of my students. It's kind of simple, and when I show it to people, they get it pretty quickly, but they never seem to figure it out on their own. So I call this the quadrant technique of thermaling. So basically we're flying along, we fly into a little negative lift, and then all of a sudden we see a positive lift here. So we say, hey, it looks like a thermal. We start hanging a left turn, and lo and behold, look, it goes all the way up to 5 knots on our vario. Wow, that's great. And we continue to circle, drops to 3, and we come back to where we started, and now we're not climbing anymore, okay? So I call this the information gathering circle. So we've gained information here, right? We've formed a mental picture. Remember before I said we have a mental picture of a thermal. So we know right away, where's the thermal? It's this way, right? So what do? About 90 degrees before the best reading, we go to less bank. Now a lot of people, I find them, they go all the way flat on the bank, and then they bank up again. I don't do that much. I just take some bank angle away, stretch the circle out. The trick is, do we wait 1 second, 2 seconds, or 3 seconds? That's sort of style points there. But we tighten up the bank, and we make a new circle. So obviously the second circle is a little better, right? We're into 5 a little better, we're into 1 a little bit less. This second circle, of course, we're trying to climb, but that's also information gathering. So every circle is information that we use on the following circle. You should make corrections every circle, even if it's 2 feet over, 3 feet over. You may find that you keep correcting in this direction, and all of a sudden you have to correct in another direction. So just by keeping track, using a quadrant, I use maybe a road or a ridge or something, just so I know where I am, and kind of get a mental picture. Okay, that's good. Yeah. A lot of people ask, when they find a thermal, which way do you turn? And it kind of depends. if you happen to fly directly in the center of the thermal, a turn in either direction may actually lead you out of the thermal. Not the end of the world, because if you use that quadrant technique, it's going to bring you right back in. But I often use a technique I call the known error. If I have a good idea where the thermal is, either by a cloud or other gliders or whatever, I purposely move to one side, so when I get to the thermal, I kind of know which way to turn. Again, with other gliders in here, I've seen people, they want to enter the thermal by diving right into the middle. That's bad form. So you want to enter at a tangent with other gliders too. But even if you're by yourself, purposely moving to one side, it kind of gives you a hint of which way to turn. None of these techniques are guaranteed, but they help. Did I do two? Wait a minute, where did I go here? Yeah. Okay, I see a lot of beginners do this.
Bob,
Yeah,
I have a question.
sure.
On the previous slide,
Yes.
so I inherently agree that that is a good idea,
Mhm.
what you're describing. But it seems like it could get you into trouble at the same time.
Okay.
Because if you don't know exactly where the thermal is, you're
Mhm.
never going to know if you're just entering for the first time. And you come in where you think you're kind of entering at a tangent,
Mhm.
what's going to end up happening is you're going to see very weak lift. You might even be coming in the sink,
Mhm.
and it may lead you to believe that there isn't really a thermal there until you actually turn, at which point, you know, you're going to be, in other words, you're going to be entering into the thermal where it doesn't appear that you could end up not seeing the thermal that you're looking for.
I would tend to agree with you, and I did say you need a pretty good idea to know that there's a thermal there.
I would counter that if you do that to the side, it's highly likely there's going to be a gradient to the lift, and the wing that rises is the one with the stronger lift, which will confirm the direction you want to turn.
Okay. Dana?
To just emphasize the point that you need to know where the thermal is. So meaning, if there's a bird, if there is a glider circling there, then that is by far the best way to do it.
Mhm.
But that is, otherwise, if you don't know where the gradient is, if you don't know where it is, then putting yourself in the middle maximizes your chances. But the thing is that
Well,
if
then you're back to maybe this scenario.
Yep, exactly.
And now this is going to take at least an additional turn using that quadrant
Yep.
technique to center it.
Yep.
I'm just throwing out ideas. I'm not saying these work all the time. I'm not saying they're the greatest. I'm not saying they work for everybody.
You're absolutely right. It's just to say that if there's a glider circling, go off to the side and enter in a tangent, right?
Well, if there's a huge cumulus, I might fly to the center if it's really big, but I might fly to one side of the cumulus and turn. And we're going to talk about wind in just a second too. So good points that not everything works all the time. Okay, I see a lot of beginners try this. I've seen some experts do this and get away with it. I've gotten away with it once in a while. But I call it figure-eighting yourself out of the lift. So everybody get those little snickers there so we know. So here this guy enters the thermal. He thinks it's to the left, and he's wrong. So what does he do incorrectly? He says, oh, I'm going to just turn right into the thermal. The trouble is, this eats up so much real estate that usually by the time you turn right, you're in some sink area out here. And I found it just very hard to, you should say, oh, it's easy to get back, but it's not so easy to get back. Now, I've seen people get in here and then really whale it over and get into the thermal, so you can do that. But I think it's better to use that quadrant technique. Come in here, your vario's indicating lift. You came out of the lift, you've gained the information where the thermal is. Just continue in the circle and come back around. So again, I've seen beginners all the time, they figure-eight themselves out of the thermal. Again, which way to turn regarding the wind. In this example, we're flying a crosswind. And we do a lot of ridge flying here at Blairstown, so we get in the habit on ridge flying, we must turn into the wind when we find a thermal. You're not going to turn tail toward the ridge. But what I notice is if we turn into the wind, and you got to remember, relative to the wind, the patterns don't look like this. This is more or less relative to the ground. But I find if I turn into the wind, and when I feel a thermal, it seems to me that the thermals kind of extend into the wind quite a bit. So usually if I turn this way, I find lift all up in this area. You notice that the turn radius is pretty tight. That would be more relative to the ground though. If I turn downwind, it always seems like I go really far. If I don't find a lift, it's a long way back into the lift. Again, is this 100%? Does this happen all the time? No. But I almost always turn into the wind, whether it's a habit from ridge flying, but it's always worked for me. This is kind of a cool one. I call it Victor's Cobra. A guy named Victor kind of did this one time, was on a check ride. He had me baffled at first, and then after a couple times I figured it out. Maybe a little more advanced technique, but here's Victor flying along. He feels some lift. So what does he do? Well, he slows down a little bit, and just like the Cobra kind of smells out the air, kind of serpentine motion, does a little, feels the lift, a little fake left, a little fake right. He's feeling, is it better this way? Is it better this way? Then he decides it's better to the left and into the thermal. There's a lot going on in a short distance here, but this, after Victor showed me this, I started doing it, and sometimes it works. Good.
I think it helps to note what he's feeling and what he's doing, or what the, very often, and this is very subtle, but you actually are pushing the stick a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. And if it's heavier on one side, that's telling you where the gradient is. That's the information. I mean, if it's strong enough, it's going to push the whole glider over, but oftentimes it isn't. But if you push to the left and it's heavier than to the right, that's because, you know, that's because you're pushing against the thermal. So that's really the...
I've also seen Victor do this and decide the thermal was no good and just keep going. Okay, this is another tremendous technique, I think, for beginners, advanced guys too. I always say 2 gliders can thermal better than 1. So we've got 2 gliders in the same thermal here, nice 126s. And I say it's like having 2 variometers. You're over here, you're getting 3 up on your variometer. Well, you can see this guy, it's like you can tell what his variometer says. So you can tell where's the lift better. If this guy you're looking across, if he's climbing compared to you, you know the thermal is better this way. So what are you going to do? When you come around, you're going to bulge out the circle. Remember, he's watching you too. He's seeing that he's doing better than you, so he's going to correct as well. If you look across and you're climbing compared to him, well, you know, maybe he's only getting 2 on his vario. What are you going to do? You're going to cut this side of the circle. And of course, I mean, this works all the way around. It's not just at one point. You're continually watching the other guy. So if you get 2 pilots that fly well together, that get along well, you'll see them kind of searching out that thermal and climbing probably better than maybe one guy would by himself. Again, for beginners, man, I get beginners in a thermal with me. What's the first thing they do? They speed up and they cut the corner, and they're always over here in my blind spot. So you do have to play nice. You want guys that can handle the glider pretty well. Another one of my sayings, though, if this is you, follow somebody smarter than you are. Oh, by the way, sometimes, too, if you're not behaving right, if this guy knows what he's doing, you can watch him. He'll try to push you. He'll try to give you a clue as to where that lift is. You'll see him kind of push in on you or pull out a little bit. But great technique. Now, 3 gliders kind of works. When you start getting into 4 or 5 or 6, especially for beginners, it just gets too crazy. It's probably better to go somewhere else. Here's another one of my crazy theories. Daniel mentioned it on tow already. I call it the 2-bump theory. Again, used for finding thermals. So I just showed like half of the thermal here. But what we've noticed over the years, as you fly into a thermal, very often there's a fringe of disturbed air on the outer fringe of the thermal. And it sometimes feels like a bump. It sort of indicates lift. But if you turn in that, you're probably just going to fly right out of the thermal. So you continue on, you'll hit a little area of sink, and then you hit a second bump. That's the real thermal. So don't always turn at that first sign of lift. Wait a couple of seconds, see if you get that second bump. And Daniel was saying that works on toe as well.
Well, it's but on toe it's even more direct, meaning you're going along and you know you hit that you see the toe plane go bounce up a little bit. You're like, oh, there might be a thermal, and now if you're high enough, you say, okay, you know, maybe if this gets good, I'll release. And the moment you see the toe plane bounce up again, you gotta get off quick, because otherwise you're gonna plow right through the thermal. So
Right.
the first bump says maybe I should start getting ready to release. The second is once you see that toe plane go up again, pull the cord and just bank on over, because you're right there.
Yep. The big question was, when you enter thermals, how long you should wait before you turn. I mean, some guys turn right away, some guys go really deep. I'm a believer in not turning immediately, but if you wait too long and fly to the backside of the thermal to where you hit the sink, and then you turn, it's hard as anything to find that thermal again. So I'm a believer in turning early-ish, I call it, but not so early, not on the first bump. Wait for the second bump. Does this happen all the time? No, but it happens quite often. We'll talk a little bit about the yaw string while you're thermally. Been a topic of conversation, guys at the airport, quite a bit. You're trained to keep that yaw string straight all the time, right? But actually, when we're thermaling, the yaw string should be to the outside of the turn. This glider's top view is making a left turn. The string should be somewhat to the outside. There was a big article written about this, not that I understood everything in the article. But one reason is simply we're flying a curved path, so the yaw string mounted in the front is going to follow that curved path. If the yaw string was in the center of the glider, it would be straight back, and at the tail of the glider, it would be this way. But there's more to it than that. And again, the article goes into the aerodynamic details. But it has been shown that flying in a thermal in a very slight slip improves thermaling performance and stability. So, I don't know, what did they say in the article, 7 degrees to the side, or?
Depends on the glider.
Depends
You know,
on, different gliders are a different way. But never fly in a skid. Never do you want to see that yaw string to the inside of the turn. It's just bad form, it's borderline dangerous. So this is a very important technique that'll give you that last little bit of thermaling performance. Okay, this is a quote I thought I came up with, but when I searched the internet, this pretty lady came up with the quote. Gabby Reece, I think she was a professional volleyball player, but she says, stay calm and aggressive. And I always use the term calm, aggressive style of thermaling. And these terms sound to contradict each other, but they really don't. So what I call calm thermaling. When you're thermaling, you should be like this guy. You should have the state of mind that this guy has. Calm, cool, relaxed, I'm on top of the world, calm as can be. If you're calm, you can keep your speed control precise. You're going to change speeds if you need to subtly. You're going to keep your bank angle steady or change it smoothly. You're going to use very minimal control inputs. Put your control inputs in early and small, not big and late. Of course, you're using your pitch and your horizon. You're planning ahead. You got your coordination. You're in a relaxed state of mind. You're planning now because you're so relaxed you can plan what's going to happen next. Never do anything abrupt. As long as you are climbing, things are getting better. So you don't have a care that you're going up. Remember that first slide, you're either going up or you're going down. You're going up, things are getting better. You actually get yourself, I call it the zone of thermaling. This sort of relaxed state, everything's going your way, you're making those subtle corrections. But at the same time, you have to be aggressive. But what I mean by aggressive is not in your motions or your control inputs. But remember that quadrant theory. You're constantly making the corrections. You're aggressively correcting. You're never satisfied with the thermal. I see beginners, they kind of find a part of a thermal and they make circles and they go up a little bit and they lose it. Never be satisfied. Be like that guy. Always look for better lift. If you lose the thermal, figure out where it is and go back and find it. Again, use that quadrant method. Don't be afraid to change your bank angle if you need to, or change your speed subtly if you need to. Be sure to keep the yaw string where it should be. Don't let the thermal push you around. I see beginners, the thermal takes advantage of them. You're going to correct for gusts. If your wing drops or speed change, you're going to be aggressive and put the glider back where it needs to be. Make the glider go where you want it to go. Again, maintain your proper speed and bank angle. So you see, it's that dichotomy of calm and aggressive. But I think it's a good way to think about thermaling.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I'm new at this, so.
Good.
All right. When I'm in a thermal sometimes, okay, or trying to, I'll notice as I'm in my bank and turning, something happens, and I don't know because I have my lack of experience. But it'll seem like my bank angle is still correct, but I'm no longer turning.
Yes. I call it hanging up.
Okay. Am I supposed to
What
force the plane into that, or just let it ride?
No. You're in control of the plane.
Right.
So the air did something to make the plane not go where you want it to go. Again, at the risk of something I said before of not flying in a skid, when the glider does that hang up, I just put a little bit of rudder toward the turret.
It's usually slipping at that point because the air is coming from the low, effectively the relative wind is from the low wing.
So you're already
You're
slipping.
going to end up with a slip, so you just put the yaw string back in the middle.
Just a
of the
little
turn
bit of
radius.
rudder.
Well, what's causing that? Is that more of an updraft at that
Yes.
certain point?
It's a gust from the inside of the turn.
Okay.
The thermal, again, like those pictures, is not this smooth air just going up. All kinds of turbulence, twists, and turns in there. So the one way I think of it, in a way, when you're banked and turning, it's almost like rudder has a way of controlling the rate of turn. Not really, but when you hang up, just a little bit of rudder, keep that nose going at one speed.
Well, see, I did this one day. I was having trouble. I held the thermal perfectly. But instead of trying to keep the bank angle with the stick, I decided to try using the rudder to do it. And I rode, that was like my first time ever getting a cloud base.
You bring up a good point. When I thermal, we want to be basically coordinated. I kind of put the bank angle that I want first, and I'm constantly messing with the rudder.
Okay.
My feet are never even. I'm like rudder, take away, take away. I'm doing this little dance, and that's giving me that steady flow. I do change bank angles around the thermal on purpose, but I never let the wing change it. But glider is a rudder aircraft, so the solution to a lot of problems is just use the rudder correctly. But that's a good point. I would see that a lot. Okay, let's just talk about thermaling skills here. And one of the problems for beginners is thermaling requires you to fly relatively slowly. What happens when we fly slowly? Controls get mushy, the glider doesn't handle that well. So I always say master the ability to fly slowly before trying to bank steeply. Again, I see students kind of go through a phase where they start thermaling and they make really wide turns. So they're really not in the thermal. So some pro comes up to them and says, oh, man, you got to bank steeper in the thermal. That'll solve your problem. So what do? They bank steeper, like this. The air airspeed goes way out of control. And when I see these guys, I always think of this picture right here. I just see wingtips and stuff, and they're just, just going around, kind of like the Tasmanian devil. So, yes, at times you do have to bank steeply in a thermal, but not at the expense of speed. To me, it's more important to fly slowly than it is to bank steeply. Why are we trying to fly slowly and bank steeply? To make the circle small. But if we bank steeply, what happens? We do have to fly faster, so the turn actually gets bigger, the radius can get bigger, and the speed has to go up. At the last seminar, they talked about the penalty of that. So only bank as steep as you can maintain the speed. Work on the speed control. Flying slowly makes nice small circles. And then as you get better at it, you'll learn that when you do need to bank steeply, you can still keep the speed under control. My 3 P's of thermaling. I think these words almost all mean the same thing: patience, persistence, and perseverance. The thing is, over the years, again, I've watched some of the pros at Blairstown in a crappy thermal, and they're just grinding it out, grinding it out, grinding. Next thing you know, they're up at 8,000 feet. Beginners tend to lose interest, or they think the thermal's better somewhere else. It's really a game of patience, persistence, and perseverance. Okay, let's talk about a few things, again, in the negative, what we don't want to do when we're thermaling, and I see a lot of people do. Don't circle and sink. I see beginners all the time. They think just the act of circling is somehow going to make the glider go up. One circle in a sink, if there's no lift, go somewhere else. There's a chance of finding lift somewhere else. Don't go through the same sink. Again, like in that quadrant technique, if there's sink in one quadrant, I see guys that'll just keep going through it. Move out of it. Your chances of finding lift somewhere else are pretty good. Don't fly too fast. Again, I see beginners going way too fast in thermals. I caution, don't bank steeper than you need to. Now, sometimes you need to bank steep in thermals, maybe when you're low or whatever. But if your flying technique goes to crap, don't bank steep. If everything's going crazy, take some bank angle out, get the speed under control, and try it again. Again, turning too late. If you get well past the thermal and you try to turn, it could cause problems. Again, we talked about don't fly in a skid, don't change directions in the thermal. This is one I see a lot of people do. I call it the pull up and the sloppy turn. Typical students cruising along pretty fast. They feel a thermal. Oh, I'm supposed to slow down and turn. So they whale up on the elevator, make the turn, and then here they come out at like 90 knots out the bottom. So you want to learn how to enter a thermal. Yes, you want to slow down, but you want to turn at the same time, and you want to slowly bleed off the speed. What I tell my students is almost turn first, then slow down. I think the experts kind of do it simultaneously, but the beginners that try to slow down and then turn, it doesn't work well, and I see that quite often. We're not there yet. Okay, so anybody have any more don'ts? Things don't do while you're thermaling? I got most of them. Okay, what do you do when you're thermal? One good idea is learn the local area. There's house thermals at every airport. There's certain fields, certain places you can find thermals easily. Of course, find your thermals on tow, release and lift. Take the first thermal to the top. Use your horizon for bank and speed reference. You notice in the tools slide, I didn't talk about airspeed indicator or altimeter. You're going to use your horizon. Get familiar with your vario. If you fly with the same vario all the time, it actually kind of talks to you. You can really know what's going on just by that one variometer. Develop a feel for the air. That just means you got to get a lot of experience for thermaling. You learn how to feel things, and you'll do a lot better. Hank talked a little bit about turning toward a rising wing. One of my famous sayings here is turn, turn, turn. A lot of times a student, we're flying right into a thermal. I'm like, okay, turn. And they're like, what? So when it's time to turn, turn. Fly smoothly. Again, I've thermaled with other people. I see their controls flapping all over the place. You can generally outclimb those guys very easily. Again, I believe turning as you enter the thermal, more on the early side rather than the later side. That's arguable. Use that calm, aggressive technique. Always improve your position in the thermal. Just keep, if you just keep circling in one spot, the thermal's going to drift away from you. Again, bank angle, airspeed, relax. 3 more P's of thermaling is practice, practice, practice. You can know all the hints and tricks in the world. You're not going to get anywhere without practice.
So Bob, you mentioned a do and a don't, right? A do, you say get a feel for the air, and a serious don't is don't stare at the variometer.
Remember
You
back,
don't know what's going on around you, and you won't ever get a feel for the air.
right, remember back when I said you must have an audio variometer. Yeah, and you learn to interpret that variometer through hearing, and now you're using your eyes for your horizon and other things. Any other?
One
Go
question.
ahead.
Time
Yeah.
for one question, and then we have to go to the next one.
Okay,
So,
but we're done anyway.
So
Good.
you can ask for one question, and then we'll go.
Okay.
Anyone have a question?
I have one question. How do you use thermal assist in that setup? I mean, some people have on the display, it shows like...
Throw it out. Don't use that. Learn how to thermal, then get the bells and whistles. Okay. Any complaints, by the way? Or complaints, how we handle the complaints? Hopefully we left you in better shape than this guy at the end of this. And one more thing, if this whole thermaling stuff, if you don't get the hang of it, I've been working in my garage, and I am taking deposits. These should be released by the end of the year, maybe. Okay, that's it.